James, a promising architect, is happily married to his beautiful and supportive wife, Sylvia. However, despite their strong bond, James notices something peculiar about Sylvia. She consistently rejects his advances and behaves aggressively whenever he initiates intimacy. One evening, after James faces disappointment over a missed investment opportunity, Sylvia comforts him, offering reassurance that another chance will come their way. When John gets a promotion at work, he treats Sylvia to a lavish celebration, gifting her a stunning ruby bracelet. As they head home, two hooded men attack them and kidnap Sylvia. James reports to the police station, and while there, he receives a call from the kidnappers, who mention his kidnapping insurance of up to $5 million. They instruct him to bring the money to a park near his house by 3 a.m. the following day, warning him not to involve the police and to come alone. James requests proof that Sylvia is safe, but the call abruptly ends. Detectives attempt to trace the call, but are unsuccessful. They suggest following the live stream showing Sylvia tied up and held captive by the hooded kidnappers. Despite his desperate pleas, Sylvia is tragically killed before his eyes, leaving James devastated. Months later, with the help of therapy, James's life begins to get back on track, though he is haunted by recurring nightmares of Sylvia's death. One day at work, James's boss, Howard, assigns him to handle a design project for a big and important client, PharmaCorp. PharmaCorp is currently the largest project being handled by James's company, and he is considered the best person for the job due to his Following day at work, James's assistant, Miranda, asks him out on a dinner date after noticing his withdrawn demeanor. Initially hesitant, James eventually agrees to go on a date with her. During their passionate kiss after dinner, Sylvia's ghost appears, causing James to abruptly push Miranda away. Confused and hurt, Miranda accuses James of rejecting her advances. James apologizes and tries to explain, but Miranda storms off, angry. Recently, James has been haunted by memories of Sylvia and constantly tormented by strange occurrences around the house, driving him to the brink of madness. The following week, James impresses Howard and the clients with his methodology for the PharmaCorp design project. However, Mark harbors jealousy towards James. Despite James's apologies, Miranda remains aloof due to their awkward encounter on their date night. She requests that James drop the topic and let her focus on her work. Undeterred, James offers her a flower and asks her out on another date. After their date that night, they return to James's house and spend a lovely evening together. In the morning, they find food on the dining table, which surprises Miranda as she assumes James made her breakfast. However, James is shocked because he didn't leave the food there. He stops Miranda from eating it, claiming it's leftover food he forgot to put away, and suggests going out for breakfast instead. At the restaurant, James spots someone who resembles Sylvia and follows her, nearly bashing someone's car, but he doesn't see her again. Miranda is frightened by James's sudden behavior. James explains that he saw his dead wife, and Miranda angrily leaves the car, as he sounds crazy. Feeling overwhelmed, James contacts his therapist and shares his recent experiences. The therapist suggests that James may be experiencing hallucinations due to unresolved guilt. He prescribes antipsychotic medication, warning James about potential side effects like dizziness, and advising him not to abuse it, which James agrees to adhere to. The next day, Howard visits James's office to learn about the progress of their client's project, and James shares that it'll soon be ready. On the same day, James is promoted to partner at the company. Later, he attempts to apologize to Miranda, but she dismisses him, refusing to engage with him. That night, James drowns his sorrows in alcohol, lamenting his achievement without anyone to celebrate it with. Suddenly, he hears Sylvia's scream and rushes to see where it's coming from. Finding a drawer open, he panics and grabs the gun inside. He is then terrified by whispers and the appearance of Sylvia's ghost, prompting him to contemplate suicide. The following day at work, James receives a disturbing email from an unknown sender claiming to have evidence linking him to Sylvia's death. The sender makes fun of his choice of tie on his first day as a partner, adding to his anxiety. James responds to the emails, threatening to to involve the police if he keeps pestering him. In response, the sender sends a photo of James holding the gun the previous night with Sylvia's ghost, threatening to forward the picture to the authorities. John notices Sylvia's picture is missing from the frame, prompting him to review the security camera footage. He sees a hooded man snooping around the office and notices a peculiar watch on the person's wrist. Just then, James receives a call from the blackmailer, who arranges a meeting at a restaurant. The hooded man sits behind James at the restaurant and warns him not to turn back. He instructs James to abandon his design project, but James refuses, knowing it could cost him his job. After passing his message, the hooded man disappears. The next day at work, James tries to tell his boss about the project, but notices Mark wearing the watch the hooded man wore from the security footage. James quickly excuses himself and follows Mark to find out where he's going. He trails Mark to a restaurant where he's dining with his family. When Mark heads to the bathroom, James follows him and confronts him aggressively, but Mark denies any involvement with the blackmail. In a fit of frustration, James hits him and checks his phone for evidence, but finds nothing suspicious. Mark warns James to stay away, just as the blackmailer calls to inform James that he'll forward the evidence to the police for failing to follow his orders. Later that night, James is arrested for Sylvia's murder. As he's escorted to the police vehicle, he sees ghostly faces, including Sylvia's, and requests to go get his medication, but his plea is denied. During interrogation, James insists the evidence is fabricated and he has an alibi, but the detective remains unconvinced. Despite James's protests, the detective refuses to consider the possibility of framing him and rather believes he truly killed his wife. James urges the detective to analyze the photo thoroughly to avoid convicting an innocent person and causing a dent in his career. As soon as the detectives exit the room, the lights flicker off, sending James into a panic. Suddenly, Sylvia's ghost appears, startling him and causing him to scream frantically and plead for his medication. The following day, James is released by the detective, who has uncovered digital tampering in the incriminating photo, rendering it inadmissible as evidence. James arrives at work looking disheveled, prompting Miranda's concern. Brushing off her inquiries, James instructs her to handle his calls and not to put any through to him. Howard finds James asleep in his office and reprimands him for his tardiness and lack of progress on the PharmaCorp project. Howard demands a meeting in his office immediately. In Howard's office, James finds Mark already seated. Concerned about James's appearance, Mark asks if he's well, but James ignores him. Howard gives James a 24-hour ultimatum to complete the project. Otherwise, he'll assign it to Mark. James becomes furious, questioning Howard's decision to entrust his project to Mark and accusing him of attempting to steal his designs. Mark tells James he's only offering assistance and pats him on the shoulder, but James aggressively pushes Mark's hand away. Moments later, James's phone rings, and he calls out to Miranda, reminding her of his instructions, but receives no response. He then answers the phone, and the blackmailer mocks him about almost losing his job due to his irrational behavior. He reminds James to drop the project, but James sternly refuses to bow to his demands. The next day, James heads to work, ready to present his design. Howard expresses surprise at seeing him, having received an email from James's work email requesting time off. John is confused, knowing he didn't send any email to Howard. James is devastated to discover that Mark has stolen and presented his designs as his own. Despite James's protests, Howard doesn't believe him, causing James to become aggressive and paranoid, convinced that everyone is conspiring against him. Howard suggests that James take some time off to regain his composure. Just then, James receives another call from the blackmailer, taunting him and warning him to forget everything and move on, or risk losing his job. Seeing Mark on the phone, James pursues him but loses track of him. Frustrated and desperate to find his tormentor, James decides to trace Mark's wife at their son's school. He threatens her with a gun to disclose her husband's whereabouts. James traces Mark to the location his wife has revealed to him. There, he sees Mark leave a restaurant and get into his car. James discreetly tails him as he drives to an isolated area on the outskirts of town. Upon arriving at the place, James sees Sylvia in an unfinished building, causing him to panic, fearing he's seeing a ghost. He takes out his medication, but discovers it's finished. James gathers the courage and follows Mark towards the building. Inside, James confronts Mark, who insists things aren't as they seem. Mark then admits to stealing James's design Acknowledging that James may never understand his motives, provoked by Mark's confession and the effects it had on his job and reputation, James demands an apology, and Mark apologizes, attributing his actions to jealousy. James attempts to shoot Mark, but on second thought, decides to let him live so he'll right his wrongs. Suddenly, Sylvia's ghost appears, startling James, who fires at it in panic. Amidst the chaos, Mark seizes the gun from James, claiming his actions were not personal, before tragically killing himself. The police discover Mark's body, along with his company's complimentary card, prompting them to secure his office. Meanwhile, James visits the company and searches Mark's office for clues. He stumbles upon a note warning him to keep his phone close if he doesn't want any harm to befall his family. This revelation clarifies Mark's earlier cryptic statement about his actions not being personal. James learns that he was coerced and was made to take the fall for it. While in Mark's office, James hears voices and hides behind a desk. While hiding, he overhears the detective mentioning that the fingerprints on Mark's body match his own and orders his colleague to search James's residence and bring him in for interrogation. James laments Mark's demise, wishing he could have intervened. Later, James calls the blackmailer over the phone, accusing him of causing the recent tragedies, including his wife and Mark's deaths, and vowing to track him down. The blackmailer dismisses James's accusations, stating that the game isn't over yet. The blackmailer proposes a deal, but James angrily explains that he has no money, suspecting his accounts must have been frozen by the police. However, the blackmailer reveals he's not interested in money this time, and then directs James to come to the location where his wife died. James arrives at the abandoned hospital, and he's suddenly knocked unconscious by a hooded guy. When he regains consciousness, he discovers two hooded men holding Mark's wife and son at gunpoint behind a thick, two-way glass. They demand that James take a gun placed behind him and put a bullet in his head, promising to release the hostages if he complies. However, when James reaches for the gun, they force him to confess to orchestrating his wife's abduction, revealing a shocking truth. It turns out that James masterminded Sylvia's kidnapping to raise funds for an investment to improve their lives. The bracelet he gave her on their date night after his promotion served as a signal to the kidnappers. Yet, the plan went awry when the kidnappers took all the money and tragically killed Sylvia. James expresses regret for his actions and pulls the trigger. But fortunately, there's no bullet in the gun. Suddenly, Sylvia appears from behind, applauding him for finally telling the truth. James doesn't believe his eyes and assumes he's hallucinating, prompting Sylvia to slap him to prove she's alive. James learns that Sylvia discovered his arrangement with the kidnappers and made a deal with them to get back at James for having her kidnapped and risking her life. Sylvia reveals that she orchestrated everything James experienced over the years, including the hooded man, ghostly appearances, and threats. However, she manipulated Mark into being involved and made him take the fall for it. Sylvia tells James that he doesn't love her as much as Mark loves his family, which makes her jealous. She wonders if he loves her and would sacrifice his life like he was about to do for Mark's family. James responds that he used to love her, but not anymore. He asks her to do whatever she wants with him, but spare the lives of the innocent mother and child. Sylvia cuffs James to a wall and shows him a document signed by him, giving away all his inheritance. She then calls the police and attempts to shoot Mark's family, but James plays a record that would incriminate her, asking her to let them go, or he'll give the evidence to the police. Sylvia demands James hand over the tape, promising to spare them, but instead, she destroys the record and kills them, framing James for their deaths before walking away.